Hey guys, it's Jeremy here with Simple Little Life, and welcome to the third and final part of the second Simple Little Life build along. This little build along project has gotten away on me. I have a lot of catching up to do. So the heat treat is done. Now we need to move on to working out the handle scales, and I'll kind of address a few of the questions. There weren't a lot of questions. The most questions that came up were regarding grinding bevels, which we talked about in the previous video, and I'm not surprised. I do think that is probably one of the hardest parts in knife making, is getting really nice bevels. Obviously using different jigs like the one that I had used to grind these bevels in really makes a big difference. And the most important thing, and it's what nobody really wants to hear, just practice. You know, the more you do it, the easier it's gonna get. There are a few questions that came up in regards to how to get your the holes for your pins lined up in your scales. I'll go over those real quickly. And then also one other question that came up in regards to finishing off once the scales were glued on. One gentleman had said that he had issues with always getting, you know, as you're sanding the metal, that kind of discolors whatever wood you have, or even sometimes it happens with synthetics. Like, I really like white G10, but it gets dirty really easily. So, you know, my tip to that, I'll speak to that real quickly right now. What I find I do is I get my scales kind of ground in, brought to the profile of the tang, and I get it fairly close, and then I'll concentrate on just grinding down the tang itself to the desired finish that I want. So if you're going up to like a 220 or a 400, however fine you want to take it, once I'm done that, I try not to touch those parts anymore, and then I will go on to shaping the handle scales, which we'll take a look at. You'll kind of see me going through that in this video. But the biggest thing I would say is that if you do get discoloration and some of that metal kind of impregnating itself into your scale material, hopefully, you know, once you've got the main part of it done and roughed out, and when you're doing just the fine stuff, it should be small particles, and hopefully once you take your finer sandpapers, even get up to like 800. Sometimes I've had a few times where that happens. I can take like 800 grit and just lightly buff that out of the wood material or whatever handle material you're using without actually touching the spine again. And I do understand that question. I've had that happen, but typically what I'll do is I'll just pretty much do as much as you can flat here, get that done, and then get the profiling done, and try to avoid contact with this part as much as possible. One thing that also helps when I'm doing that to make sure that I'm not touching this part is I'll take my final finish on the spine and in the tang of the knife, and then I'll keep all those lines going this way. That way, as I'm sanding, you know, usually when you're sanding your scales, you're kind of working like this. You'll be able to see once you start touching your metal, and you'll start putting some scratches into there, go back to your spine, clean those out again, and then just, it takes a little practice, but very often you can do pretty much all the shaping without ever touching the spine again. But it's just more of a technique thing, and you kind of just need to do it a little bit to get it sorted out. So I guess we're gonna get going. I'm going to be using red G10 for these scales and then black carbon fiber pins. So the next part of this process, I'm gonna go ahead and cut out a little piece, 2 pieces. What I'll do is I'll kind of set this on here, scribe out a nice square line, and cut both sides of my scales. And the reason I like to use a square here is that way I'm always left with good usable stock like this. Try and keep it tight. I don't want to waste very much, but I like to have all my G10 remnants in my drawers nice and squared and cleaned up. That way you can very quickly check if they're going to work for future knives, and it just kind of keeps everything easier to use when you're starting off with nice square edges on every piece. So without further ado, let's get this thing done. All right, so one of the questions asked was in regards to how to keep your holes lined up for your pins. Now, there's a couple ways. The way that I always used to do it, and I'll just kind of show you here, kind of talk it through. I do one scale at a time. Obviously, you want to make sure you keep them. This always, to me, becomes the inside, because it's nice to work with a nice finished surface on the outside. But what I would do is I'd make sure, okay, so this is going to be for that side. I would just set it like this and just drill the first hole. Once that hole was drilled, I would take my pin material, usually cut it down into smaller pieces so it could fit underneath the drill press, and then I would put that in there, and that would keep that hole lined up through the knife scale and the tang of the knife. Drill my second hole, I put another piece of pin material in there, again keeping everything lined up, and then however many holes you have, this one has 3, then as I drill my third one, it's going to be lined up because these two are in line, and then do the exact same thing for this side, making sure to flip it so that we end up with scales that are like this. What I do now is a little bit different, and I by far prefer it because it's faster. And it doesn't matter, you know, you don't have to pre-cut your pin material. What I'll do is I'll set it on my scale material like that, put the insides together, both outsides are facing out, kind of line up these two pieces. We've got a lot of extra material here in length to work with. So I'll set my knife on here like this. And again, I usually try to put the skinny piece on top if there is a variation. And then I'll just take some of these clamps, and these are Can't Twist clamps. I did a Tool Time Tuesday on these, and in that Tool Time Tuesday, I actually said that the reason I think they're called Can't Twist is because it's a cantilever design. And then one of you smart viewers, I'll tell you, you viewers are a lot smarter than I am, you'd pointed out the fact that they're probably called Can't Twist because as you're tightening them, they can't twist. As is sometimes a problem when using C-clamps, because obviously this part that's applying the force is rotating, and sometimes you get twisting, and sometimes that can actually mar up your surfaces. So that's actually the nice thing also when you're using these to clamp, sometimes they start kind of twisting around and moving your material, whereas these Can't Twist clamps, they're simply putting pressure straight down. So once you've got a real gentle bite on there, these things don't move and you can just crank them up. They work absolutely fantastic. And so this is the way that I usually do my scales. Put these on here like this. And we can hit these suckers first. We got the 3. I'm also going to be drilling this hole through here. And then I'm going to enlarge it because I do want to have a nice radius that matches this hole. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to actually drill that hole out and then come in there with a bigger bit. I don't think we have clearance for that underneath there. Let me see if we can do it like this. There, that should just work. And now what I can do is I can clamp this thing together real super tight, and I use 1, 2, 3 blocks on my drill press so that it's actually above the table of the drill press. Well, let's just head over there and I'll show you. And these are the 1, 2, 3 blocks. I do believe I have a Tool Time Tuesday on those as well. If I do, you will see a little link up in the corner that you could click on if you want to watch it. This way it just allows me to keep a nice supported surface, and yet we still have clearance for these clamps. So this is a super fast, very efficient way to drill holes and keep everything lined up properly. And I'm actually going to drill on this side. Everybody kind of has their own way they like to work. I'd rather drill like this, I do believe. So we'll just drill these suckers out. All right, so we've got that drilled out, and everything should line up right nice. And what I'll usually do at this point is I'll actually take this, open it up, and so since this was like this obviously like this, and I'll usually trace these out just so I can keep them, just so I don't get them mixed up. So it doesn't have to be perfect because I'm not really using these lines to cut out or anything like that, but just so I always have that idea of which scale is for which side. Again, this one goes like this. The next part, what I'm going to do is drill these holes out here, and I'm not going to do this together. I'm going to do this separate because, well, there's no reason to do it together. And let's see what we would like. If we're that big, I probably want this to come right around there, so I can kind of just measure roughly. I don't know, this is pure guesstimation. Let's go, well, it doesn't really matter. We could go a half inch. You know what, we're just gonna grab a drill bit and I'm just gonna drill these out and kind of see how it looks. That's the plan. Key thing though, is I do wanna get this drilled out before I cut this, because I'd like my drill bit size to be bigger, because I kind of want this to be like this. And if I cut this first, obviously it's gonna kind of pull to these sides. It's not gonna center itself properly in the hole. So I want my drill bit size to be within this dimension here. So if I kind of drill this out first, then I can cut out my scales, and we'll have this nice, this radius feature in here, this little fillet, and it'll be a lot easier to do it before we cut out the scales. So, see what we got. Looks like it might be cool. Might be cool. As long as we have enough material there, that's what we're doing. I'm drilling these out to 31/64. All right, so we've got our pins cut out. Make sure we're all lined up before we go any further. Oh yeah, it's beauty. A little motivation from the old knockometer. One thing I really like using is 1-2-3 blocks again when I'm doing stuff like pin work. Sometimes you get pins that are a little tight, you need to drive them out. You can just set them on the 1-2-3 block. If they're longer pins, set them like that. Tap with a punch, really handy. These are a nice fit. One question that I had was some people were asking how much oversized I should drill my pinholes, and I go with the exact same size of the pin material. So this is 3/16. Obviously there's slight discrepancies depending on who made the pin material. Sometimes what I'll do, I find that if anything they're oversized the odd time. So what I'll do sometimes is actually chuck this up in my cordless drill, just take a piece of sandpaper and just run it down there while it's spinning, just to get that ever slightest little bit of the outer diameter reduced a little bit, and then typically that will help them slide into the holes nicely. You want to have really nice clean holes, because when you look at it you don't want to see like a gap or something like that, but also you don't want to have something that you're just beating the crap of to get it in there, especially if it's something like the synthetic pins, or if you have a very fragile pin material, handle material. I've wrecked some burl doing that in my chopper build. Some of you might remember that. But here we can kind of see, we can get a close-up of the radius, the way that we've matched the radius there. So I think that's gonna look pretty sharp. Again, really easy and simple way to do things. So the next step is I'll kind of do a rough cutout of the scales. I'm gonna have to use my little super trick here. I don't want those pins all the way out, I just want through the first scale. And that's a nice fit right there. I'm not having to beat on them too hard, but they're just nice and snug. Okay, so now I'm going to cut out this profile, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my drawing and just, once I've got this roughly cut out, I'll cut out my drawing so we can kind of match that radius, the curve for right there, and kind of draw that on there, and then we can cut these out and get them ready for glue up.
Now for this part here, I'm going to kind of eyeball it. I think I'm close enough to the holes. I'm just going to see. Yeah, it's pretty good. So, trying to keep a pencil on my desk is being difficult for me lately. So I think that's pretty good right there. Yep. I'll cut that out. And then I will stack my other scale on top of it, put the pins through, and on the grinder, even those out, kind of bring them down to the same radius there, get them like tickety-boo perfect.
All right, now to finish these scales, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be putting a 45 all around the edges. And to mark that, I'm going to come in, and the first part I'm going to do is grind this part to 45 degrees. And obviously the reason for that is that once this is glued on, it's very difficult to grind in there. So what I like to do is kind of give myself a mark as to where I'm going to grind to. And this is just a real simple way to do it. I kind of shim it up with a ruler, kind of find whatever you have laying around, and then I just take a pencil, I set it down there like that, and then come right in here, and you kind of adjust it up and down according to where you want that to be. But that looks pretty good to me. And then I can take my other one. Just keep in mind that you want to make sure the same side. So I'm putting the inside down for both of these. And then I'll set this on here. Just like that. And now I can grind my 45s to that. And I'll have nice even chamfers on both sides. And for the actual grinding itself, what I do is this, again, just a very easy thing to do. I have just a piece of maple. It was 90 degrees here and I cut it right in half, exactly at 45. You can customize these as you'd wish. And then I just have some holes for some screws to hit them. And I'll kind of pick which one is going to work the best for this application right there. And oh no, I think that screw's a little too big for these holes. That's not going to work. I'm going to hold it. Usually, I mean, this is a 3/16. This screw that I have is a little big, obviously, so I'm going to have to just hold it. Usually I screw this down in place, and then your flat platen's right here, whatever you're grinding against. Pretend that's it, and you can kind of just come in here, work it, and it gets you nice consistent angles. It works just fine doing it like this too, just by hand, so that's what I'll end up doing. All right, so we've got our scales 45 up at this part right here. Right before I glue these on, I am gonna take some sandpaper and I'll probably bring them up to about 400 grit, just get them really nice, maybe 600-800, and then take them to the buffer. Just wanna really, ideally you want this to be the same finish that you're gonna put on the rest of the blade, and you have to get that before you glue it up. Now, previously I had mentioned that I wanted to do a really cool surface treatment on this blade, but the truth of the matter is I just don't have time to get that squeezed into this build. I've never seen it on YouTube before, I've never shared it here, and there's not a lot of people doing it, and it's really, really interesting. So I am going to do a standalone video about that surface treatment. But for this knife here, all I've done is I've sandblasted it, wiped it down with lacquer thinner, and I'm going to stick it in acid etch, and then we'll take it to a stone tumbler. Now, a lot of people ask me what I use for etching. I use a 75 to 25% mixture of ferric chloride, 75%, and apple cider vinegar, 25%. That was just kind of a guess one time. I had some, you know, I put my ferric chloride in a container and I wanted to bring the levels up a bit, and I thought, I don't know, I'm just gonna try some apple cider vinegar. I don't know if regular vinegar would work. I just happened to have apple cider vinegar around. I put that in there and just, it was like the first time I ever tried something. It really works very, very well. I can get a super nice dark etch on these. Yeah, we're gonna go ahead and give this a stone wash, acid wash, and then we'll get these scales glued up, start profiling, and we'll get this sucker finished up. All right guys, so we've got our blade out of the acid etch and the stone wash, and then we've got our handle scales. One thing I just realized I should have done before I went ahead and cut this, I should have actually counterbored this hole right here, because it's gonna really stink. Even this side's gonna be quite difficult. See, my countersink is gonna wanna slide out of that hole, so it's gonna be kind of challenging to countersink that, so I should have done that before I had made these cuts here. Oh well, live and learn. So far this is going pretty good and I can't complain. So what I'm gonna do now, I'll just clean up this little apparatus, this little part right here, get that sanded out by hand, and then we'll get this glued on. And once we get it glued on, then we'll, after we get that done, we'll kind of rough profile this whole thing, and yeah, it should be good. Another question I've been asked was, since this is acid etched, we glue our scales onto here. Once we start bringing our scales down to match this profile, what's going to happen to the acid that we have on the spine? And in this case, the way that I'm gonna do it, it is going to disappear. We're gonna take that away. There are ways to get around that. One of them being, if you kind of use your pins and put your scales on, get everything kind of tightened up, grind everything, do your final grinds, and then put your scales on. That works sometimes, but I've done that before too, and I've had just slight discrepancies, you know, because you take it apart and you put it back together, and there's just, it's not a perfectly perfect, like usually, you know, once you grind this out, it feels like just one solid piece. And so it's not always the best thing to do. Like, that doesn't always work, but that is one way. And then another way you can get around that, depending on the handle material you're using. If you're using wood, this isn't going to be an option, but if you're using synthetics, a lot of the synthetics, you can dip them in your etching solution. I mean, obviously you're gonna wanna test it out, but some synthetics act different than others. I've actually done, like, I use black G10, and you can't even tell that it's been in the etch. I have some glow-in-the-dark scale material, and believe it or not, I put that into the etch. So basically, you'll finish up the knife before you etch it, get your scale shaped, get everything totally done, and put the whole issue into the ferric chloride, and bring it out, wipe it down, clean it all off, and you can't even tell that those handle scales have been etched. But then, of course, everything is nice and dark and black. So that's one other option too. But in this case, I'm going to glue these scales on, and then we are going to profile down to it. So we are actually going to have a shiny spine and tang of the knife. Mostly just the blade, and yeah, just the blade is going to be acid etched. So let's get on this thing. I gotta get this thing glued up, and we will, yeah, excited to get this thing done. All right, guys, I finally finished my knife, and it took me a long time, and I was also squeezing this in a lot amongst other knives that I was working on, and to tell you the truth, I rushed this build quite a bit. Like, there's a lot of steps that I'm like, I just gotta get this done. So this isn't an example of my finest work, but overall, I mean, I'm happy with it. It's a good blade. It's got a great heat treat on it, super nice straight edge, like the grinds went well, all those parts that you can't really rush. I didn't rush, but there's a few little spots. I'll show you real quickly what I'm talking about. One thing I entirely forgot to do was clean up this little radius before I glued everything together. I didn't even think about that. The overall shape, I love the shape of this knife. It's a great blade. And what I really wanted to do with this build was keep those hard 45s. That's kind of the way I interpreted the drawing. And that tool that you saw on my grinder there, that work rest, worked absolutely fantastic for it. So really happy with the way those turned out. Really nice and even there, nice straight lines. And you know, that makes it a very, very comfortable handle. And this didn't take very much hand sanding at all. Probably one of the least amounts of hand sanding I've spent on the handle of a knife recently. The shape itself, you know, for my hands at least, it fits perfectly in that little palm swell there. And when I grab onto this thing, it just feels fantastic. So I just want to say a huge thank you to Zombie Joe Knives for letting us use his template. This is a cool little blade. I'm actually going to carry this blade. I'm going to make a little kydex sheath for it, and this is going to be like my EDC BC, get to do some hard testing on it, and just enjoy it. One thing I've really enjoyed about this build along is seeing what you guys are doing. You guys are sharing it with the hashtag sllbuildalong, which is so cool to see. And then to all of you that have emailed your pictures, thank you so much. That was the one part with this build that I really wanted to do and I was really looking forward to, is to be able to see other people's rendition of the same basic knife. You know, we all started from the same template, but you guys all put your own spin on it, and you guys took this in so many different directions, and it's really, really cool. Very inspiring to see how you approached your knife. So let's go ahead and take a look at all the knives that you guys have emailed me. Wow, those knives are absolutely fantastic. You guys should definitely be proud of yourselves. Thank you guys so much for taking part. You know, when I first thought about doing a build along, it's actually a viewer suggestion, and I'd had that idea probably for about a year before I actually did the very first one, and I was kind of nervous because I thought, what if nobody builds along with me, right? I mean, it kind of looked like a fool, you know, doing this video and nobody else is doing it. So thank you guys so much for being a part of this, for taking part. And I've had 5 people email me, and they've told me that this knife was the very first knife they've ever made, and it was because of this group of us doing it together that gave them the push they needed to just get off their butt, get out there and make their first knife. So to that end, I think this build along was absolutely fantastically successful. And again, just it's fun to be a part of this community we have of knife makers and people interested in the same stuff. We get to share with each other and inspire each other, and we get to make knives. That's cool. That's a pretty fun little group to be involved with. Anyways, guys, thanks so much again to Zombie Joe Knives for letting us use your template, and thank you. Well, at least it didn't land on the tip. I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed the series. Hopefully your build went well for you and you've got a great knife you can be proud of. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. It helps kind of promote things. And then subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. And as always, guys, I thank you so much for watching. Cheers.